Hi guys, Ed here.
Hi, Hugh here, and welcome to the final part of our Chris Buck Vintage Stratocaster Restoration series.
It's been a long old process, but we've gone into things in a lot of detail, which I hope you guys have all enjoyed. So we're going to be splitting this final part into two parts, which will come out on consecutive days. If you're watching it today, it's June 20th, and the second part will come out tomorrow.
Absolutely, we didn't want to leave you on a complete cliffhanger, and it really is time to kind of finish it off. I mean, but part of the delay has actually been, obviously we're all in lockdown, and Chris hasn't actually been able to pick up his guitar. And the deal always was that Chris was going to show the guitar off first on his Friday Fretworks, and that actually came out yesterday. So if you want to see more of the kind of playing aspect of it and what it sounds like, that's the place to go. So that's Buck and Evans Friday Fretworks. Yeah, and so literally the guitar's been at my house and he's only just been able to collect it, so hence the fact that it's kind of dragged out a little bit. And you can tell how long it's dragged out from my haircut. I think Ed's been getting some trims at home, but I'm turning into a hippie here.
Oh, it's a good look. It's a good look.
Yeah, I'm hoping Doug and Pat are going to invite me on their show, if my hair gets long enough.
Get out the sword canes, definitely.
Exactly, yeah.
So in this sort of two-part little mini final series, if you like, in the first part, which is coming out today, as I said, what we're going to be looking at?
Well, basically just two things. The long postponed pickguard restoration. So remember those three horrible switch holes? I'm patching those. And it took quite some time to figure out what on earth to do about those, because nobody kind of posts up videos on YouTube, and I kind of find out why in the process of doing it.
There was a lot of searching and planning and chats back and forth. What's the best thing to do? Finding old material or changing the whole thing, wasn't there? There's a bunch of good ideas, but
yeah. So I mean, it's done. It's solid, and you'll see the outcome. So we're covering that, and also rebuilding the two vintage potentiometers that were there. So they were in an absolute mess. So they needed complete restoration. But I was really keen to preserve those because it's part and parcel of the guitar's history, and there's no real reason, unless there's something fundamentally wrong with them, why they can't carry on being used in the guitar. I mean, the other thing as well, from Chris's perspective, is vintage potentiometers add considerably to the value of the guitar. So if there's some way to restore them and replace them, it's in Chris's interest, the guitar's interest, and hopefully you'll find it interesting too.
We've done a bunch of stuff on pots over the years, haven't we? And we've sort of come to the conclusion that they don't sound better, they just have a different sound and taper to modern ones.
Yeah, it's the taper really, isn't it? I mean, you've noticed it particularly on Gibsons, but I would say generally, vis-a-vis vintage guitars, there's something about the pot taper that makes the controls work as you'd want controls to work. The way you can turn down the volume control and things don't get dull, and the tone controls have a really responsive kind of, they can be really subtle rather than on and off switches,
Yeah, and it's worth having as many sort of vintage original parts in the guitar as possible.
Oh, 100%, absolutely.
So let's have a look and see how that all turned out.
So the big scary moment has come, and I'm going to be tidying up these switch holes in the pickguard. I've done one already. I'm onto the middle one now. What I'm doing is using this fence that I created as a guide for my Dremel router base. And I'm just tidying up the edges, and I'm obviously routing past the original lines, and I'm going to just route down just beyond the black layer, so I've got a little ledge at the bottom. The plan is to inlay pieces of celluloid nitrate that have been cut to fit. I'm actually using quite a slow speed with this because if I set the speed too high, the celluloid nitrate will actually melt and even burn. So quite a slow speed. I'm also using a cutter from StewMac that is specifically designed for inlay work, so it cuts downwards like a downward spiral, so it doesn't lift up the edges of the cut. Okay, down to the black layer, a little bit more. It's just a little bit messy at the bottom of the route, but rather than going over and over and over it with a router, which is quite risky, I'm just going to use a craft knife to clean off the excess and get it ready to be inlaid. Well, 2 down, last one to go. I'm quite pleased with that second one. That's pretty neat. That's what the original looked like. And it's finally time to glue these little patches in on the pickguard. I've cut out 3 little patches from the Jazzmaster pickguard. Slightly beveled the edge underneath so it didn't get caught up in the corners, and they basically push straight in. This one's a little bit of a tighter fit. I kind of got better at this as I went along. So what I've done is I've put a bit of tape on the back of the pickguard to prevent the guard getting inadvertently glued to the rear of the backing board. And what I'm using to glue it is basically a slurry that I made from the green section of the Jazzmaster pickguard, which I've dissolved in acetone, and it turns into this kind of paste basically. I'm just running this around the edge of each hole, and be quite generous with this stuff. I've made these little clamping coils here. I'm just going to push that in. Okay, that'll probably look a little bit of a mess when I take the clamping coil off, but I did this one earlier on. The clamping coil is held against the patch piece with a little bit of double-sided sticky tape, and it seems to be holding quite well. I've left the patches set up overnight, so looking a bit messy at the moment. Nothing to be too concerned with. Just tried a little bit of sanding there just to see how it would feather in, and I'm pretty encouraged. So lots of cleanup to do, and I'm going to make some really small sanding blocks so they're completely flat. I'm going to put some very fine grade paper on the underside, and I'm just going to gently work my way back through all this celluloid nitrate squeeze out from that slurry I made, and hopefully get these looking a lot tidier and decide on a strategy from there. So here's the little sanding block I've made. Perfectly flat surface, a little offcut of plywood. Notice that I don't wrap the sandpaper around the corners because you get a little bump on the edges, so it's just glued down flat and then trimmed along. And I've used masking tape, which is probably the most useful tool available to anybody who does guitar restoration work or building work. Taping it down as flat as possible, and I'm also protected the surrounding area because this is quite high, this squeeze out spot here, so most of the sanding will be done with the surrounding areas protected. And then I'll probably change to finer grit paper and start working it into the pickguard and smoothing everything out. I'm starting with 320 grit. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. I mean, some of the join lines are extremely clean, got a little bit of kind of black bleed through just in these areas here, which is, I guess, to be expected really, but shouldn't look too bad at the end of the day. This is the finished pickguard. And I have mixed feelings about it. I've certainly learned a lot, and the main lesson from this is that patching celluloid nitrate pickguards is a really hard thing to do. I also learned a lot about the material itself, so a couple of myths that I think we can dispel really is that the colour that you see on this pickguard it comes as a result of exposure to UV light. I put my piece of celluloid plastic, here's what remains of it, put it in the sunlight for probably about 6 weeks, and the colour didn't shift at all. So I don't really think this lovely kind of browny green has anything to do with sunlight. The other thing that is often suggested is that the colour comes from the black layer underneath migrating through. And again, I think that can be dispelled because when you sand the green outer layer and it gets closer and closer to the black layer, it doesn't acquire this lovely brown quality, this amber quality. It just becomes a kind of greyish blue, which is not particularly pleasant. My feeling is that the colour probably comes from oils and dirt just gradually kind of impregnating the outer surface, because when you sand this stuff and you polish it, you can actually get back to a colour that's pretty close to what you see with the patches, but also what you see in the areas that have been protected by the control knobs. I don't think that it's because the control knobs have protected the surface from the light. I think it's been protected from the dirt. Anyway, that's my feeling about it. So on the positive side, the patches are really tight and solid. This one I'm really quite happy with. This one's slightly less happy, and this one not particularly happy. But here's the problem. If there's black underneath, and what happens is that the black melts into the acetone in the slurry, and then actually quite quickly migrates through the slurry, and you see it turning up in the microscopic gaps around the patches. It's particularly apparent on this one. So it is what it is. I think next time, if I ever do this again, I might use araldite or something like that, something that wouldn't melt the plastic. Anyway, there's a reason that you don't really see any videos on how to patch pickguards on YouTube, and it's because it's really difficult. As for the colour mismatch, if you carry on watching the video, you'll notice that when I first assembled the pickguard with the pickups and everything, these look slightly darker. I tried dyeing these to to match the colour of the pickguard more closely. And another problem is that when you do apply stain, the stain then seeps down into any gaps, and then you get kind of like it just picks up the edges in a different colour, and it kind of just looks worse, really. The other thing you could maybe do is spray some tinted nitro lacquer over the top of this, and I think a lot of people do that. I had a pickguard from a very famous restorer that had been sprayed with celluloid, and it looked great for a while, and then it just wore through and it just looked absolutely awful. It took me about 2 years to wear through it. I think it would probably take Chris about 2 weeks because he plays a lot harder than me. So I'm just going to leave this as it is. It's a patched pickguard. It was always going to be a patched pickguard. I can't say I'm delighted with this, but Chris is probably more pleased than I am. He describes these as being like scars on a retired boxer's face, badges of honour. So that's a nice way to look at it. And finally I get to do something I feel a lot more comfortable about, which is working on the electronics. I'm going to try and recycle these 2 pots, which are the originals. These are stack poles, and looking at the date code on the side, these look like the 32nd week of 1962. I can't read the other one because it's got solder residue all over it. So I'm just going to separate these off. They're joined together by this Holcomb Great resistor, and clearly I'm going to need to do a little bit of work on these. First thing I want to do is establish whether they're working or not. So let's see if we can get a meter reading. I'll set my meter to 2 mega ohms, and I'm just looking to see some kind of resistance across here in the hope that it's actually going to work. That's actually really encouraging. Let's have a look at the other one. $275. Excellent. Looks like we've got potentially 2 working potentiometers. Okay, I'll set this meter off to one side. Clearly there's an awful lot of solder on here. I do want to do something about that. This bit of solder on the back of the pot here suggests to me that this was originally the neck tone control, which is where it came out of the pickguard, because the ceramic capacitor, one leg, was actually tied to the side of the pot there. So I'll reuse this pot in exactly the same way. A lot of rubbish to take off the top of this, but I'm very reluctant to apply a massive amount of heat to this pot because there is a danger that it will be destroyed in the process, just of cleaning it up. So what I'm going to do is remove the casing from the pot in order to remove the solder from the casing. Now there's a few tabs on here, 2 massive ones there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little ones. So very carefully I'm just going to prise these out of the way. Yes, I'm using nippers here, but only because I can slide the sharp end underneath the tag a lot more easily rather than try to prise it with a screwdriver. Just being very careful not to close the nippers all the way. Fingers crossed. Missed one, of course. There we go. That doesn't look too bad inside. Okay. Use this solder sucker. That's going to be pretty hot for a while. See all that brown stuff? That's just solder resin, which is pretty nasty. So I'm just going to let it cool and give that a wipe down now with some acetone and a cotton bud. I'll just move it off to one side and do the other in the meantime. Okay, a little jar of acetone. Let's see how this does. I can see that this is another 1962 potentiometer, which is exactly what I want to see. And again, 32nd week of 1962. Excellent. Don't think I'll get that solder off that. Just going to pull this out of here. Okay. Right, back on with the soldering iron and I'll clean up these contacts. Before I do that, I'm just going to get a little bit of deoxit. Deoxit D5 on a cotton bud. Fair bit of dirt on there. To be expected really, given the age. Just a little bit more. Okay, I'll leave it at that for that one. And with another cotton bud, just going to clean these contacts here on this part of the pot. Just have a little clean out in here as well. Make sure I've picked up all the dust and debris, which could fall down where it's not wanted. Right, let's put it all back together. So pot reassembly is basically the reverse of taking it apart. So this piece slots on here. This goes in next. Make sure you've got full range of motion. Excellent. Make sure there's no little bits of metal or debris where you don't want it to be. And then the cover goes back on. You should feel it click into position. Now, I'm just going to bring the big clips over first. Press all the others down. Okay, let's press the big guys home. Two more. Okay, that feels really nice. And we're back up to 285. Good, I'm pleased with that. Okay, looks like we've got a functioning potentiometer. Good as new, maybe.
So that pickguard's come out looking, well, far better than I thought it would.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. As I said earlier on in the video, it's if I do another one, I think it could end up looking really good.
Don't tell Chris. Nobody tell Chris on the internet.
Oh, I tell Chris. He's probably actually happier with the pickguard than I am, which is really funny. Yeah, I learned an awful lot in the process. It's actually a really tough thing to do.
Probably why there's no videos on it.
Yeah. You know, I guess some people have just said, oh, you know, just put a repro pickguard on there or what have you. And it's part and parcel of the guitar, isn't it? And it's got 3 patched holes in the pickguard. But in a sense, it's kind of almost like maybe it'll become like a signature look for him. And I like the pickguard. You know, it's part of the guitar's history. And I'm pleased we went through the process.
Yeah, I think it adds character to it. You know, it's not a pristine mint-looking guitar, and it's, as you say, part of its history, and I think really adds vibe to it. And as Chris has said a few times, you know, if he really doesn't like it, he can always stick some stickers over the top of it or something. But no, I think it's great. It's more functional, as he quite rightly points out. You know, there's less chance for dust or beer or sweat or anything else to get in there and muck up the electronics, which is kind of the point of the guard. I think we learnt a lot certainly about the way the different layers bleed into each other.
Yeah, I mean, you know, maybe that would kind of have, you know, positive, you know, it'd be a positive thing when at some point in the future I'm ever trying to replicate the look of a vintage pick guard with, you know, a brand new nitrate guard or even some of the PVC guards, because they're getting that kind of amber green colour. That seems to be the elusive thing, really.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we're going to pause it there. We felt there was far too much information to sort of cram into one video, and rather than cut things out, we decided we'd split it into 2. We're not going to keep you hanging, so part 2 will be coming tomorrow, so make sure you subscribe to not miss out on that, and we shall see you all tomorrow.
Double.
Hwyl fawr.